afternoon. Wilkinson here. Today my guest is Michael Vaccaro. He is from LA. He is an actor and a whole bunch of other things. Wesley, we met, at a star being installed in Palm Springs on the sidewalk. Did we?
Is that correct?
Was that 3 years ago?
You know what? I honestly couldn't tell you when that was, but yes, it was. There was a star on the. It was the the Palm Springs Walk of Fame, right, for a legendary comedian, Judy Tenuta, who was a dear friend of mine, and we worked together many, many times. And yes, and she was getting a star on the Palm Springs Canyon. That was it.
And then we met. I told you I was a photographer, and I photographed you.
Yes, you did.
All right. Oh, we missed something. We didn't tell my people hi. Tell them hi.
Hi, Wilkinson's people. How are you?
We're good. Anyway, okay. So I don't know where to start with you. Let's see.
It all started back in the...
So you said your coming out story was very brief and easy.
Oh, okay, sure. Coming out story coming out as a homosexual. Yes.
You are?
I came out. Yes, I did. I am. Yeah, it was very easy, and I will tell you why. Because first of all, I grew up in New York City.
In the Bronx?
I was born and raised in the Bronx. Yes. Okay. By the time I came out, we'd done the whole Jefferson's thing. We had moved on up to Manhattan.
Whoa!
We went from the Bronx to Manhattan, which was a big step. And so I think when I came out, I was either 15 or 16 years old. I want to say we were living in Manhattan, and it was just me and my mother. She was a single mother. I was the only child, and it was very easy for me because I was an actor already. I started as a child actor, and by that time I was in high school, and I went to what was then called the High School of Performing Arts, which is now it merged with the High School of Performing Arts, which is the famed school. So Performing Arts and Music and Art merged together and became one school, which is now called LaGuardia in Lincoln Center in New York City. So I was going to music and art. I was a voice major, singer. So I was surrounded by actors and singers and dancers and artists and all that stuff.
All the gay people, right?
Well, yeah. When I was in high school, I mean, I would say most of the male population in my high school were gay. So it was a very easy thing to come out. In fact, it wasn't even really intentional. I was sitting with my mother one morning at breakfast, and I said, "Mom, you know I'm gay, right?" And she said, "Yeah."
That's how it went?
That's the story.
Wow. What made you ask her that? I
think because it was so not a big deal, but I had heard stories from other people that, they had told their parents that they were gay, and then, they got thrown out of their house, or their relationships with their parents were destroyed and all that stuff. And I didn't even understand that coming out was a thing. That it was a thing that you do or that you have to do, like sort of a rite of passage. Right. So I thought, I guess I need to do this then. So I sat down for breakfast over my, Frosted Flakes or Fruity Pebbles. And I said that. I said, "Mom, I'm gay." And she said, "Yeah." She was a tough broad. My mother, she was one of those tough New York broads. She had seen it all and done it all. And and so really nothing fazed her. And she was tough. She was tough as nails, my mother. So, but she was incredibly supportive. And loving and wonderful in her brassy way. She was brassy. She's what we would have called a broad back then. She was a real broad.
Right. So how did you get into acting?
That was kind of like being gay. It was kind of like when I was a kid. For some reason, it was always, there was a seed in my head somewhere. I always knew. I don't remember a time in my life when I did not want to pursue acting or singing or dancing, whatever it was. I don't know where it came from. I just remember it always being there. And at some point when I was a kid, I guess I realized that it was a profession, that it was a career, and that this is what people did for business. And I think, again, I must have told my mother maybe over breakfast that I was, this is what I wanted to do. And what do I have to do to make that happen? And so again, from a very, very early age, my poor mother, she spent so much money, I'm sure. She got me singing lessons, and I went to dance school. I took dancing lessons. I took modern jazz and ballet and tap, and she signed me up for guitar lessons. She went out and bought a piano, and she signed me up for piano lessons. And then I took acting lessons, and I started studying acting when I was a kid. And then I got into I got into a theater company for children in New York City. It was called the First All Children's Theater, FACT, fact. And I started working in the theater when I was a very, 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 very young child. Yeah.
So you never wanted to be a fireman?
Never wanted to be a fireman. Wanted to date some firemen, but
there you go.
I've never wanted to actually be a fireman. That seems like way too much work. It seems very dangerous.
And how long did you live in New York?
Oh my gosh, how long did I live in New York? Well, again, I was born there in the early 1960s. That's how old I am. And let's see, I moved out of New York, I think, when I was 25. And I came to LA. The idea was that I was going to come. I had all this theater experience in New York City, and I was also on a soap opera that used to film in New York City. And so I think the idea was that I was going to come out to Los Angeles and take the whole place by storm, and I was going to get a sitcom, and I was, Valerie Harper was going to play my mother.
How did that work out?
Well, that plan didn't work. I didn't get the sitcom, and I didn't get, and Valerie Harper was not in it. But I did write something many years later, by the way. We can talk about this too. Many years later, I did write a sitcom that ended up being a web series, which now people can find on Amazon. And I wrote it with Valerie Harper in mind. In fact, I went to her, I found her agents, and I submitted the script, and I said, we're doing this show. I really want Valerie Harper to be in it. And it was literally that week that Valerie Harper announced to the press that she had been diagnosed with brain cancer.
Ooh.
Right. So she was not working. So she very kindly turned it down. She was very sweet about it. But yeah, then I moved lived in Los Angeles for about 8 or 10 years, something like that. But I kept getting work in New York. And so I kept having to go back to New York constantly to do stuff. And so then finally I just thought, well, I guess I'm going to just go live back in New York again. So I went back and lived there for about another 11 years or so. So I think in total I lived in New York City about maybe 35 or 40 years, something like that. Yeah. It's my home.
And you had a partner.
I did have a partner, yes.
That's a 16-year one?
Oh, yes. Well, I've had two. I've been
really?
married twice, yes.
You've been married?
I've been married twice.
Okay. Well, the second one, yes, I know about.
Yes, you know about the second one. The first one, yes.
16-year was the
I
first one.
I was in a relationship. We were married. We were together for 16 years. His name is Michael. We were Michael and Michael, which was adorable and absolutely annoying.
Did you have an answering machine then?
Of course.
And you said Michael and Michael?
Yes. Yes, you've reached Michael and Michael. And actually, he was 6'4" and 225 pounds, and I'm a tiny petite flower, and so I think I'm 5'8" or 5'9", and I weigh about 135 pounds. So he was Big Michael and I was Little Michael. And yes, that is in fact what it said on our answering machine. And in fact, that is also what it said back in the day when we had an answering service. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
The people would call the answering service. Do you want to leave a message for Big Michael or Little Michael?
They'd say that.
Yes. Well, yes,
wow.
we were together for 16 years, and he's still a big part of my life. He's still one of my best friends. Yeah.
And we're talking about height here, right? When you say Big Michael, Little, we're talking about height, right?
Height
Okay.
and weight and other things,
Okay.
possibly intellect.
Oh, okay. You're not little.
I'm not.
No.
I don't think
Okay. So then that relationship ended.
Yes. Amicably and wonderfully. We just, we had been, you know how relationships end sometimes. They just like it's done and you just know it.
Right.
And we were just growing apart and we just realized we were better friends than,
Right.
and we were going in different directions. I guess that's what we would say. So it was very amicable and wonderful. And he is still my family, more than really my actual family. Yeah.
So without going into a half an hour story,
yes.
why don't you hit the highlights and tell what happened next?
So after that relationship ended, that is in fact when I came back to Los Angeles the second time, and I immediately when I arrived, I met this absolutely beautiful man named Antonio, and we met on Facebook. And like I said, I had just arrived in Los Angeles that week from New York, and he had just arrived in Los Angeles that week from Chicago. Mm-hmm. And we must have had a mutual friend on Facebook. He wrote to me. I, of course, immediately accepted his friend request because he was absolutely stunningly beautiful. And then he asked me out on a date, and we had a fantastic date, which lasted for 8 months.
Well, you have to tell a little more about that.
Okay.
You need to bring the poem in here somewhere.
So we were having dinner on this lovely date, and and as you do on a date, you talk about yourself, what you like, what you don't like, blah blah blah. And so he at one point said that he liked poetry. So here's the story. Many, many, many years earlier, I had found this fantastic poem online somewhere. I still to this day don't remember where I found it. It's not important, but I found it online. And it was on some website with a whole bunch of poems on it, but weirdly, none of the authors were listed on any of the poems. So I never knew who wrote this poem. But I loved it so much that I kept it. I kept the poem. I printed it out on a piece of paper and I folded it up and I put it in my wallet. And it stayed in my wallet for about, 5 or 6 years. So cut to me having dinner with this absolutely gorgeous guy named Antonio, and he says to me, that he likes poetry. And I said, "Oh, that's so funny. I actually keep my favorite poem in my wallet, in my pocket." And I pulled it out and I, opened up the piece of paper and I handed it to him, and he looked at it for a second and he looks at me funny and he says, "Is this a joke?" And I say, "No, why? You don't like it?" He said, "Yeah, I like it. I wrote it."
Wow.
So he had written the poem that had been sitting in my wallet for 5 or 6 years.
Now, had he written that when he was in Chicago?
I believe so. Okay. Yes.
And you were in New York.
Correct.
When you found the poem,
that is
you were
correct.
in New York,
yes, right.
So now you're both in LA.
And now we're both in LA. We're both sitting across from each other at a restaurant.
So the stars are aligning.
It was absolute fate.
Right.
It was absolutely meant to be. This is the. I didn't need a whole lot of proof in my life that things were meant to be because I've had a lot of experiences like this. But that was it. That was like, oh, okay, this was absolutely meant to be, and we were inseparable from that moment on. Like literally inseparable. I don't think I spent a minute without him after that night. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I mean, like literally, I think we moved in together like 2 weeks later.
Wow.
I mean, we just knew. It was, he was great and I was great and I think we were great together and just everything just seemed perfect. So yes, we moved in 2 weeks later into an apartment here in Los Angeles. And then exactly 4 months to the day from when we met, we got married. And at the time, I believe there were maybe 2 or 3 states where you could legally get married, same-sex marriages. And I think it was Hawaii and Massachusetts and Vermont. I think those were the states where we can get married. So what we decided to do was we got in the car one day in Los Angeles, and we drove 3,000 miles across the country to Provincetown, Massachusetts, which was one of my favorite places to go every summer. We found a preacher, a pastor, whatever, somebody official sounding, and we went to the beach, and we got married. Exactly 4 months to the day after we met. 4 months later, we were married. And then we got in the car, and we drove back to Los Angeles. And, of course, we stopped in Chicago, and so I met all of his friends and all of that stuff, and we had quite a wild adventure going across the country. He was Puerto Rican, and he was a very militant homosexual, I guess is the word I would use, meaning like he refused to not hold my hand. Like he absolutely had to hold my hand constantly. He wasn't. We drove across the country, and everywhere we went, in Missouri and Kansas and Oklahoma and all these places where we stopped, like we would get out and he would hold my hand and he would kiss me. He was big into like PDAs, and yeah, he was always ready for a fight. So yeah, so we had a magnificent trip both ways across the country, and then we were a married couple. And then we came back to the apartment and together in Los Angeles for exactly 4 months. I should continue, yes?
Oh, yeah, of course. You got to finish the story.
The story finishes this way. So about 4 months later, one day he felt sick. He felt like really sick. I was at work, and he was at home, and he fainted, felt really bad. When he came to, he called me and he told me what happened. And he said, he said he was going to go to the emergency room. So I left work and I met him at the emergency room. I'm sorry, I did not meet him at the emergency room. I ran to the emergency room. Once I was there, I found out that he had been admitted into the ICU.
Not good news.
Not good news. He apparently had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and had no idea. We had no idea. He was healthy. I mean, he was seemingly healthy in the sense that, like, he ate like a normal person and he slept like a normal person and he went to the gym and, he was big and buff and worked out and he was gorgeous. So there was no indication that anything was wrong. He was HIV positive, but he was on meds for that, so he was not detectable.
Right.
So there was no indication that anything was wrong. But when they got to the hospital and they did a blood test, they found out that he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was stage 4. His body was riddled with it. So they immediately got him into a room and got him hooked up to all kinds of IVs. And when I got there, like literally, he was hooked up to all kinds of things and all kinds of machines, and they had started giving him transfusions.
So when you went to the work that morning.
Yes.
And you left him at home and he was normal.
Correct.
And the next time you saw him, he was in that state.
Correct.
Wow.
It was a Monday. And if I went back, I could figure out the date for you. But I do know that it was a Monday. I remember that. So we were then trying to figure out what was going to happen next. We were consulting with all of these doctors there at the hospital. It didn't look good. And then so by Wednesday, 2 days later, his organs started shutting down. I think first was his liver and his kidneys shut down. So at that point, then he went into a coma.
But he said something to you before that.
He did.
I know the story.
Yeah, he did. That Wednesday, one of the doctors came in, and because he was jaundiced, which is how we knew that his liver had stopped. And the doctor, and they had been giving him these transfusions, but the thing was the transfusions were not working.
Right.
His body was not accepting these the blood. The doctor, he actually took me out. He said, "Can I speak to you outside?" And I would love to point out that the fact that I was even allowed into that room and that the doctor spoke to me was because I had a marriage certificate, which is why it's so important.
Right.
So the doctor and I were about to leave the room, and Antonio said, wait, stop. I have to tell you something. And so the doctor left and waited for me outside, and I went back and I said, what? He said, and Antonio said to me, he said, "I can't die because I just found you." So I said, "You're not going to die." And I walked outside to speak to the doctor. And when I came back into the room, he was unresponsive. He had gone into a coma. So that was on Wednesday. So that was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And things started shutting down. And finally, there was a cardiologist who came in and looked at his heart and told me that he was, they could tell that he was it was imminent. He was about to go into cardiac arrest. And what did I want to do? They literally said to me, there were 2 doctors and a cardiologist. "What do you want to do?" I was like, "What do you mean? What do I want to do?" And they explained to me exactly what would happen. They explained to me that it did not look good. It was definitely going to happen. There was an event about to happen. They could see it. And what they would probably have to do with him is ultimately they would work on him for a while, and they would have to break open his ribs, cut open his chest, break open his ribs, like literally, like break the ribs out of his chest, and work on his heart with their actual hands. Like that's apparently how bad it was. Like the electric shocks and all that stuff were not going to work. And they said, we have to do all of this. By law, we have to do all this. This is the procedure. We have to do all this. And the cardiologist said, "But I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. It's not going to work." And so I said to them, "Well, then don't do it. Why go through all that? Why put him through all that? He's in a coma, but like, if it's not going to work, and you're really seriously telling me that it's not going to work, that he's going to die, then don't do it." And again, because I had a marriage certificate, as soon as I said that, they were gone. Everybody ran out of the room. They took all the monitors out of the room. Like everything was gone. And they said, "Okay, just, stay with him." And this I will always remember too. There was this very nice nurse And she said to me, she said, talk to him because he can hear you.
Mm.
So they all left, and I crawled into his bed next to him, and I started talking to him. I told him, the kind of stuff that you say at that moment, which is, don't worry about me. I'm going to be fine. You're going to be fine too. Whatever is happening now, wherever you're going, it's going to be great. It's going to be an adventure. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be fine. Everything is okay. I love you. And then this was the most interesting part for me. He was on a ventilator. Mm-hmm. That was one of the many machines that he was on.
Right.
And they had unhooked all of the machines when they all, took off and ran out of the room. But the ventilator was still on. It was the ventilator that was actually breathing for him. So the ventilator was still moving. Like his diaphragm was still, like you could see it. It moved up and down, up and down, as if he was breathing. But as I laid there in the bed with him and I was talking to him and I looked at him and I was, he was in my arms. I was holding him. I knew that he was gone. I knew that he had died.
So you knew that moment.
I knew the moment that it happened that he was gone, even though the ventilator was still moving. The ventilator was still moving up and down as if he were breathing. But I knew that he was gone. How did I know that? There was something that still to this day I don't know that I can explain exactly, but I just felt him leave. Hmm. It was a very clear feeling of like he has left. And along with that came the knowledge that the absolute knowledge that what I was holding onto, what I was holding in my arms at that particular moment was nothing, was not him, was not him, was not the Antonio that I loved, that I was married to, which I found like so interesting and so fascinating. And so I stayed there, I stayed there, I guess, I don't know how long it was. Maybe it was a half an hour or something like that, until I finally got up and I walked out of the room and I went to the nurse's desk and I said, he's gone. And that was it. He was gone. And he died 8 months to the day from when we met. So we met 4 months to the day exactly. We got married, and then 4 months after that, he died.
That's incredible. Mm.
Yeah. Yes. It was certainly a journey, but in fact, it was only the beginning of the journey, because then you go through, the whole grieving process, which takes years, or it takes forever. I'm still grieving in a way. There are still things to this, and that was in 2009. So that was 14 years ago. I'm still learning things about myself because of that experience. I'm still learning things about life because of that experience. I still am changing because of that experience. So yeah, it never ends.
And then the hard part came when you went home, right?
Because he died on December 28th of 2009. And of course, it was going to be our first Christmas together. So we put up a Christmas tree and there were presents and all that stuff. And I had actually brought all the presents to the hospital on December 25th, Christmas morning. And I thought, well, okay, he's here in the hospital. I'll just give him his gifts in the hospital. And because it was the ICU, they wouldn't let me. So that day I left the hospital. When I left the hospital and came back home, I brought them all home with me and I put them back under the tree, and I thought, okay, well, we'll just do it when he gets out of the hospital. That's fine. I don't care. So of course, yeah, when I got home that night, I think it was finally like 4 or 5 in the morning, something like that. There was the Christmas tree with all the Christmas gifts that I did not give to him. Mm. Yeah.
So thinking about that story, it's kind of like, I believe in the law of attraction.
Yes.
So to me, that's part of the story here that, who would have thunk that you'd all get together, the two of you'd get together? Mm-hmm. You put the poem in your wallet,
right,
and you carried it for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And to me, that's what brought him to you.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Right. For sure. We understood that. At some point, we understood that it was fate, that it was absolutely meant to be. And in fact, I told you this story, but with my previous husband, who's Michael, Big Michael. When he and I broke up, like I said, it was very amicable. We understood that we were growing apart. We were going separate ways in our lives. But it was never really clear. Like, there was no like incident or event that happened that, there was no fight that happened. There was no history of fighting that, made us break up or anything like that. And we would often say to each other, like, it's so weird, isn't it? It's just weird that we broke up, that we're not together anymore. And I think we both assumed that this was it, that we would be together for the rest of our lives. And so I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years after Antonio had died. And all of a sudden this thought hit me, and I was living in Los Angeles and Michael was living in New York. And I called him. I said, Michael, I know why. I know why we broke up. And he said, why? And I said, because I needed to be in that hospital room on December 28th of 2009. And the only way that could have happened is if I wasn't with you. I needed to not be with you in order to meet him, in order to marry him, in order to be with him in the last moment of his life. It was meant to be.
Wow.
And he said, yeah, I totally understand that. He said, I think you're absolutely right. So we never know why anything happens.
Right. And you'd also said to me earlier that if you hadn't met him, you don't know how that would have gone for Antonio. Like I said, he had just moved to Chicago. I mean, from Chicago to Los Angeles and didn't know anybody. And he probably would have met people over the 8 months that he was there. But I was the first person that he met when he, got off the plane, basically. So it is possible, I guess, that he might have died all alone. With no friends or no family there. He had been estranged from his family, from his biological family. He hadn't seen his family since he was 19 years old. Wow.
And that's a whole other story of trauma and abuse and all of that stuff. So he was really alone in the world. And so, the thing is that I look back on it, and if I was there just so that he would not die alone, then I'm okay with that. And in fact, I have come to think of it as a gift that he allowed me to be there at that moment with him.
Quite a story.
Yeah. And again, like I said, it continues. I continue to this day to learn stuff about myself and about how I interact with people because of that. I still now think things like, I see random people on the street sometimes, and I will think, what happened to them today? Because I remember thinking after he died, like the next day, looking out my window in my apartment, I would see people walking around and driving and laughing and doing things in their lives. And I would think, what's wrong with you people? Are you crazy? Don't you realize that the world has just ended? Like, why are you acting like everything's normal? Right. And so now I constantly look at people and think, it hits me sometimes, the thought, like just random people on the street, like what happened to that woman today?
Right.
And how can I be compassionate to her? Which is a really powerful thing.
Well, I think I'm going to have you back and talk about your acting career.
Okay, sure.
This isn't going to get done today.
I can do that.
But I really thank you for coming in today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.